time now, I've come to look the other way. I've seen much better days. When I'm looking.
That was Breathe by Planet Mercury. I'm Dakota Antleman, and this is 3 Pounds of Pure Culture. I love music, and on this podcast, I'm going to take you in-depth into local and hyper-local music that gets its life in the smallest of venues, from here to Boston. This episode, we're breaking down 2 rather different bands. One based in Rhode Island, but regularly playing punk shows in the MetroWest area, is our first band, Planet Mercury. They're bringing early 2000s pop-punk sound to small and accessible local venues. After that, it's going to be Future Teens, a Boston Music Award-nominated group that I can say has brought me to tears whenever I've seen them live. Back for another episode now by phone from Vassar College is my co-host Clement Doucette. Clem, welcome to the broadcast.
Thanks for having me.
So kicking things off, we're going to talk about Planet Mercury. They're definitely an interesting group. They're based in Rhode Island, but they're currently performing in support of their debut EP, Unoya. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. The group formed in 2017 and offers concert attendees a nostalgic sort of revival of that 90s and early 2000s pop-punk sound that a band like Green Day or Blink-182, someone like The Offspring, used to re-energize the genre back in the 90s. Though they live a state away, they're regular, particularly in the Worcester area, and I saw them at a favorite spot of theirs in that city, the Raven Rock Club in Worcester. We're going to dive into them right now, so I'll ask you, Clem, when you listen to this band, what's your first impression of them?
It was definitely very British sounding. I got that impression. Almost reminded me of a less acoustic, less political Billy Bragg. If anyone knows who that is. It's kind of a very 90s, early 2000s sound that, they're very technically skilled, but unfortunately, from a personal standpoint, I can't say I'm really into that sound. But I think they're quite talented, and they definitely have some room to grow musically, because I sense that they're sort of just starting off, and they're sort of establishing themselves and their sound in the scene. But I think they definitely are skilled, and I'm interested to see what they'll do in the future.
Yeah, definitely. I think room to grow is going to be a theme that we hit on a little bit later in this segment, but I think definitely I sort of agree with that. They're a band that has just such a strong foundation, and that starts with just the strong guitar sound in this band. When you look at their EP from January, it opens with Disaster, which has this very simple but driving chord progression at the beginning. Then as you go through the EP, you see a lot of the same style, particularly at the openings of songs. They'll kind of leave things intentionally choppy before building into something a little bit sort of louder or cacophonous. And that's a style that's been clear, as you said, whether from that 90s punk sound, Blink-182, Green Day, Offspring, any of those guys. But it also can come from kind of an older punk band like the Pixies, who are really famous for that kind of quiet to loud shift that I see Planet Mercury doing. And then even a grunge band like Nirvana that kind of played with volume as well. But as I said, I think a band that has that awareness early on a debut record like this EP, that has that awareness and that guts to kind of go play with silence as another instrument in their band, and sort of play with volume throughout a song. I absolutely love that. But as you kind of alluded to there, as I like those nods to the ancestors of modern pop punk, I did find a rather sort of interesting review from a music website called Divide and Conquer. In it, a critic named Dan Weston wrote that, quote, Planet Mercury has all the basics covered, but I think that if they really want to start to get people's attention, they're going to have to start thinking outside of the box in terms of possibilities, end quote. You've given these guys a listen, and you kind of alluded to it in that first response, but what's your sort of stance on that argument? Is Planet Mercury too similar to these other bands?
Again, I think I agree a little with Dan Weston, the critic. I think they are making some technically sound music, and they have a strong foundation. I think they are sort of rooting themselves a bit too much in those classic bands. I think if they sort of were to free themselves, I guess, from the base a little that they're going off of, they would sort of really set themselves apart. If they continued to be inspired by these classic bands from the 90s and early 2000s, but they did something a little different and maybe a little more modern, then they could become really special and really set apart from other pop punk bands.
I definitely feel that. I think, I'm going to go to their defense a little bit on this one because, as I think they're similar, I think that's just kind of something that's going to happen when you have a new band, a young band like this coming up. Music is all about derivation, and then comes the innovation part. Obviously, if you're in a situation like this, you don't want to plagiarize. You don't want to sound exactly like Blink or, Green Day or Offspring, any of those guys I keep referencing. You're not a cover band. But at the same time, kind of reading a review like that, I'm not sure kind of villainizing a band for similarities to a real sort of like archetype of the genre is fair. I think Planet Mercury is a band that formed, in recent years. These are guys who grew up in the late 90s, early 2000s, and as people who are listening to punk, that's just what punk was and what punk still is. Blink, Green Day, they were kings in that time, and they kind of redefined what punk sounded like. So I think the fact that, Planet Mercury sounds like these guys, I don't think anyone's saying it's accidental, but I don't think it's bad either. I think they have the foundation. They're displaying, as you've acknowledged, kind of just some very solid technical prowess on the guitar, on the drums. They're working on a really good stage presence. They have a lot of great chemistry as a band, and I think it's almost, yes, they sound like a Blink. They sound like some of those other bands, but kind of listening to them, I feel like that's a great foundation. And very quickly, I mean, they have another EP coming out in just a few weeks. If my hunch is correct, I think as they release more music, they're just going to naturally get into a more original sound, I think, and kind of jumping on them for similarities in that first EP to kind of a more well-known band isn't really fair to what is a really solid group of musicians on that stage.
Yeah, I agree.
So, I did kind of allude to it there. I mentioned, them being on the stage. I mentioned their chemistry as a band. You haven't seen them live, but as I mentioned, I have, and I would love to talk a little about that. In short, these guys are just absolutely wild on stage, and I absolutely love that. The show that I saw at the Raven was their Halloween show, which meant that I saw frontman, lead vocalist, rhythm guitarist, I believe, Jerry Picard, absolutely shredding on guitar in a shark costume. This guy was just rocking around the stage. He's jumping up on the bass drum at one point. This guy was insane, and it was amazing. I mentioned the drummer Mike Gibb was also amazing. He comes to that show wearing full David Bowie makeup on his face, and he was just going ham throughout that show. He broke, I believe, at least 2 drumsticks over the course of the show, and had countless others go flying out of his hands. So at one point, he just ran out of sticks in his quiver. Had to call to someone off stage to get him more sticks. This guy was an animal behind the drums, and I absolutely loved that. In that whole broken stick situation, he had a stick splinter in his hand. He ran out of sticks. He just finished the song still playing with a kind of splintered stick in his hand. So that was just absolutely amazing. The energy from, the back of the stage with the drummer all the way forward, to a guy like Jerry Picard was just so captivating. It had me floored. It had that entire club captivated. And that's where, I think a live performance now is still so important. I think in an era where everything's getting out on, YouTube, SoundCloud, Bandcamp, whatever, you're hearing your music through, a band that can just floor you with a great live performance, even if it's in a small room, is a band that has promise. And that's what I thought looking at Planet Mercury. They just had so much going for them in their live show. I'm going to give you a chance to talk again soon. We got to wrap things up with Planet Mercury. So what would you say would be your favorite song by them?
I think Disaster was my favorite song by Planet Mercury. I really liked the early 2000s rock sound. It was kind of a throwback to music from that time period. I thought the opening with the sort of minimal guitar was good, which I appreciated because I like that sort of thing. So definitely Disaster, which I think we're actually going to play. So you're going to get to hear that.
Yeah, and definitely, you acknowledged it there, but I'll encourage people listening, definitely listen to that beginning riff. That's what I was talking about earlier, if they, the quiet to loud shift, that has the similarities to, to a Nirvana, to a Pixies, to even Blink in some places. That song in particular, I agree with you, has a great shift, from the beginning to the first kind of drop in that song. I'm going to have to go with a certain song as my favorite, whose title we can't necessarily say in the broadcast. I'm going to have to sort of tiptoe around this, communicating the title of this song to you. But it's going to be the second track on their debut EP, and begins with the word holy. It just has this, again, I talk about the drop. It has this explosive drop around the 15-second mark. They clobber this nice acoustic-sounding intro with this just wall of classic electric guitar, 2 sets of guitars, a very aggressive snare drum in there. I talked about it earlier. I talked about it again in reference to Disaster, but this song just roars out of the gate from quiet at first to loud in a flash, and that just keeps you hooked throughout the entire song because it has such personality, it has such kind of range displayed through the song. So definitely give that a listen if you have a chance. But we're going to take a chance now to play that song that Clem mentioned. It's Disaster, and it's off the EP Eunoia. Again, hoping I'm pronouncing that right, but take a listen to that.
I've gotta feed the ego, 'cause it's the only life I know. I've already made the plan, 'cause I've forgotten who I am. And I know they will take the bait. Everybody sees my halo, and they wonder why it just won't glow. Doesn't make it any easier when I let my demons show. And I know they will take the bait. Oh, I got you seeing double. Hey, I bet you won't see through these lies. Seems as though my life is in shambles. I'm a disaster and nobody else knows why. Well, I live for the picture frame. All my photos look the same. I shake hands with delirium. I've got the world underneath my thumb. And I know they will take the bait. Oh, I've got you seeing double. Hey, I bet you won't see through these lies. Got you seeing double. Hey, I bet you won't see through these lies. Seems as though my life is in shambles. I'm a disaster and nobody else knows why.
Changing topics now to a very different band. It's going to be Future Teens. While Planet Mercury has been frequently hauling up to the Worcester area from Rhode Island, Future Teens has been absolutely shredding clubs around their hometown Boston with one of the most energetic sets I've seen. Getting into a little history with them, they formed in 2014 and immediately recorded an EP in their bedrooms. They followed that last year with another EP entitled Bored and Alone. They then finally dropped their debut full-length album, Hard Feelings, last year, I believe. Future Teens describes the record as 10 tracks of romantic misadventure, miscommunication, and mistakes. And the album that album that they're attaching that title to recently helped them secure a Boston Music Award nomination for Best Alt-Rock Act. I had the opportunity to see them live twice, once at Great Scott in Allston in late August with you, Clem, and again earlier this month at Fitchburg State University. I'm so excited to break them down right now, but I will start with you. I'll give you the first word. What were your first impressions on them, Clem?
Well, the show in Allston in late August, when I saw them, they were one of three bands. I think it was three. The other two bands were really kind of crappy shoegaze bands, so Future Teens really stood out at that show, and I really liked them. It reminded me a lot of the sort of indie rock that I'm used to and that I enjoy. I really liked, they sort of have a mid-2000s indie rock feel, kind of reminded me of the Shins, maybe Rilo Kiley. And I also noticed some of the 90s, like early mid-90s rock influences that I also like good shoegaze music from that time, not the bands we saw in Allston, which were kind of miserable. I didn't like those very much, but Future Teens really stood out, and the first impression I had of them was a strong one.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you bring up shoegaze in there, and Future Teens definitely more indie, more alt-rock than shoegaze, but they absolutely have that kind of shoegaze element in their sound. They, if you ask them what their genre is, they're going to tell you something called bummer pop, which I think actually encapsulates it pretty well. They have a sad influence. They'll get quiet. If you listen to their album, they have loud songs, but they can also really tighten things down and get soft and sad. Sort of in a good sort of shoegaze way. So definitely that influence there. Countering that, though, I think they really are all about energy and all about sort of chemistry that, again, I've talked about live performances that they can display on stage in a live performance. These guys, the whole band has so much charisma, but it comes in just this non-threatening way and this kind of almost attractively sort of dorky way. They're an indie band. They have this kind of hipster style, sort of in the way they dress, the way they present themselves, and then they really do kind of lean in when they're dealing with an awkward, situation. They got to retune their instruments during the shows, and so they'll just slip into these kind of awkward silences, and the audience will just kind of stand there staring at them, and then they'll crack a joke, and it's just wonderful. It has this very homey feel. There's so much charisma and chemistry between them, and then they're able to kind of extend that out to the audience in such a, I said homey, a very sort of social way too. Absolutely love that. As I said, though, they're all, the whole band is great at this, but no one is better than Amy Hoffman. She's on vocals and guitar, and she stands front and center at the stage. Not necessarily that she's the front man, because she splits time singing with one of her bandmates, but she just has a gorgeous voice. She's got some rock solid riffs on the guitar. She had kind of great style in the way she presents herself on the stage, and she has great chemistry with the rest of the band. She'll joke back and forth with everyone. You'll see her mingling with the band, before and after shows. This whole band is amazing, but when I listen to them, she's the real rock star for me, out of a band of very talented musicians.
I definitely agree. When I saw them, I definitely noticed the stage dynamic they had, and they just had an excellent presence, which...
Absolutely. Taking the chance now, though, we're going to talk about favorite songs, as we did with Planet Mercury, and as we do with every band we feature on this podcast. Clem, for Future Teens, what's your favorite song?
I definitely liked their song Sleep Schedule, which captures a very real feeling. I could really sense the vocalist's sort of sense of desperation, their sort of sense of emotional breakdown, coupled with the sort of minimal guitar, drum, cymbal backing, really sort of accentuated the vocals, and sort of that raw feeling that they're singing about.
Absolutely. I'm going to have to go with Learned Behavior. As I said, I just loved Amy Hoffman's voice in this band, and that's kind of her song where she really gets to shine on top of a really kind of smooth and steady instrumental for her. I got to hand it to her on that one. I've seen this band twice. I've seen her sing that song twice, and it's brought me to tears both times I've heard it. It's just an absolutely gorgeous song. Going to take the chance now to show you a bit of that Future Teens sound that we've been talking about. It's not Learned Behavior or your song Sleep Schedule, but it's going to be yet another gorgeous track off their recent album. It's What's My Sign Again. Take a listen.
Said to me after reading about our incompatibility, we disagree on everything except that we should not be dating, because according to the moon, I guess the only thing we're destined to do is end. Don't know if I believe it this way. I say that I'm not to blame for keeping you
A great song there. That is going to do it for us here on this episode of 3 Pounds of Pure Culture. Thanks again to Clement Doucette for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And a shout out also to Great Scott and Fitchburg State Student Radio for hosting the 2 Future Teens show that I had the chance to see. A thanks also to the Raven Rock Club in Worcester for hosting the Planet Mercury show I saw. And also, of course, a thanks to Planet Mercury and Future Teens themselves for agreeing to appear on their podcast today. Let us play their music for you. You can, of course, follow Planet Mercury on Facebook or Instagram and catch their music on Spotify and Bandcamp. Future Teens is also on Facebook, Instagram, Spotify, and Bandcamp as well. Right now, you're listening to another song of theirs to play us out. It is Sleep Schedule, as you had mentioned, Clem, and it's a lead track off their debut album, Hard Feelings. Going forward, please make sure to check back regularly for new episodes of 3 Pounds of Pure Culture. We've been on a break recently, but we are back now to producing regular content. We'll have some great bands in the queue ready to show you and are excited to begin playing some even indies with artists themselves on upcoming podcast episodes. Once more, though, for now, this has been 3 Pounds of Pure Culture. Dakota Antleman, thanks for listening.